All right, greetings. Welcome back. This is part two of the Daniel chapter 11 teaching from my book, The Prophecies of Daniel. Um, there are certain errors I got to fix and so forth, so I'm fixing those. Just fixed it, by the way, from the first video. There's two major errors that I fixed, typos, so to speak. So here we go. We're going to go right into first, we're going to explain the death of Antiochus III, Antiochus IV, Epiphanes' father. And then we're going to explain how conniving Antiochus IV was, how as he went into power. There's just so much uh, dishonesty going on at this time. But anyway, political moves and so forth. So here we go, explaining what had happened from verse 19 and 20. In desperation to cover the debt to the Romans, raiser of taxes to the glory of the kingdom, um, Antiochus III chose to rob temples in the eastern land, but he shall stumble and fall, not be found. Well, this is a typo that I just fixed. I guess I could have pulled it back up. I just fixed it. It now says in the Word copy. I probably should have resaved it to make it. But it's good. It says Antiochus III now because it's a typo. I left out the other Roman numeral. Made an excursion with his soldiers by night in order to plunder the temple of Elymas of Persia. Now, the inhabitants of the land rose up in mass against him because he was robbing their temple and destroyed both him, Antiochus III, and his soldiers. So it says, within a few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. Now, I strongly believe that his soldiers were destroyed, and I think that somehow he died by accident because the Lord is so accurate in here. History has it that the Elymas people of Persia rose up and killed him, but I think it was like manslaughter, accident type of thing, because God says that it was neither in anger nor in battle that he was killed, but he was killed there, right? I believe God over history books. History book can confirm what God says. But if there's a conflict between what history says and what God says, I go towards what God says. That's my faith. All right, verse 21. This is the introduction to Antiochus' fourth Epiphanes, prophesied before he ever existed. And in his estate shall stand up a vile person. Who's his estate? Antiochus the third Epiphanes. No, Antiochus the third Magnus. I'm sorry. His name was Magnus. Antiochus the third Magnus the Great. His estate shall stand up a vile person, right? To whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom. So, but he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. All right. So we have this to kind of cover. Okay, so here we go. Daniel calls Antiochus fourth Epiphanes. Oh, Daniel said. I need to fix that. So that's coming. Daniel said Antiochus fourth Epiphanes was the vile person in Daniel 11:21. Actually, I need to get rid of this. Daniel calls my Antiochus Epiphanes the vile person, right? So the was needs to go away. With what has been written about him, vile may be too kind of a description for him. I mean that literally. He began his reign in 176 BC. Now, not long after his defeat by the Romans, Antiochus III was assassinated. Now, and his son Seleucus IV took the throne. From this point on, the Seleucid Empire entered into decline. Antiochus IV Epiphanes was a hostage in Rome as part of the treaty which was imposed upon his father Antiochus III. Demetrius Soter, son of Seleucus IV Philopater, had legal right to the throne, but was sent to Rome in place of Antiochus IV. Seleucus IV was then assassinated. Antiochus IV was on the way home when news of his brother's death reached him, to whom they shall not give the honor of his kingdom. All right, the vile person. Knowing that he needed support over the dignitaries who desired Demetrius Soter as king, and those that supported the usurper Heliodorus, Antiochus IV visited Eumenes and Attalus, kings of Pergamus. Antiochus espoused their. Now, Pergamus was part of Rome. Antiochus, well, part of, I guess, the Seleucus dynasty, but ended up being part of Rome. Antiochus espoused their support using his cunning and flatteries, obtained the kingdom by flatteries. Overwhelmed by his flatteries, the Syrians yielded the throne of Antiochus IV peaceably, but he shall come in peaceably. So I guess we go back. I'm going to say before the Romans had taken Pergamus, it was Seleucid, part of the Seleucid dynasty. So he went over and did some butt kissing, and because of his butt kissing, um, they relinquished the throne willingly to Antiochus IV. All right. So he made a political move and he won it. He won his political move. He did it peaceably, which is, I guess you got to do what you're going to do. I mean, he wanted the throne, he got it. Now, so he wasn't a dumb individual by any means. At least for now, he wasn't. Now, verse 22. And with the arms of a flood shall they be overflown from before him, and shall be broken, yea, also the prince of the covenant. With the forces of Eumenes and Attalus, which were like in the nation of water, the supporting parties of Heliodorus, the usurper, who were torn down. Okay, the usurper was torn down because of the inundation of water, the overwhelmingness of the group of people overwhelmed the usurper, and so therefore, and with arms of a flood they shall be overflown from before him. The arms of Heliodorus, the forces he had gotten together, were drowned in the flood of the opposing influences, is the best way to say it. The last phrase of verse 11:22 points to a different circumstance of series of events, also the prince of the covenant. From the onset of Antiochus IV's reign, he inflicted his wretchedness unto the people of Judea. It seems that the covenant which had been established between Antiochus III and the people of Judea was not honored by his son, Antiochus IV. That's what that means. Antiochus III presented a covenant, an agreement between Judea and him in the Seleucid dynasty. And then Antiochus IV went in and betrayed it. Makes sense, doesn't it? Because the guy was so vile. Though the first and second books of Maccabees are not inspired scripture, they can be referred to as historical documentation of the events of that time. So let's visit Second Maccabees 4, verses 34 and 35. But after the death of Seleucus, when Antiochus, called Epiphanes, took the kingdom, Jason, the brother of Onias, labored underhand to be high priest, promising unto the king by intercession 360 talents of silver, and an oven or revenue 80 talents. Besides this, he promised to assign 150 more if he might have license to set him up a place for exercise and for the training up of a youth in the fashions of the heathen, to write them of Jerusalem by the name of Antiochians. Antiochians. How's that? Antiochians. Um, Wherefore, Menelaus, taking Andronicus apart, prayed him to get Onias into his hands, who being persuaded thereunto and coming to Onias in deceit, gave his right hand with oaths, and though he were suspected by him, yet persuaded he him to come forth of the sanctuary, whom forthwith he shut up without regard of justice. For the which cause not only the Jews, but many also of the other nations took great indignation and were much grieved for the unjust murder of the man. Okay, so the unjust murder of the man. I'm going to bring you verse 23. And after the league made he him, he shall work deceitfully, and he shall come up and shall become strong with a small people. Now, this here is explaining the details of the coming Sadducees. They betrayed Israel. So, Daniel 11, prophecies of the coming Sadducees. The Sadducees were Seleucids. I mean, actually, there were Judeans that went on the side of the Seleucids in their religion, Hellenism. So the Seleucids, Hellenism, rubbed off on these Sadducees. So verse 11:23 links itself to the last phrase of verse 11:22. The division of the Jewish people had become more distinct through the appearance of Antiochus IV. The Pharisees and scribes were loyal to their covenant made with God, while a smaller group surfaced seeking recognition and favor, thus embraced the religion of Hellenism. First Maccabees 1, 7 through 14. At that time, there appeared in the land of Israel a group of traitors, traitorous Jews, who had no regard for the law and who had a bad influence on many of our people. They said, "Let's come to terms with the Gentiles, for a refusal to associate with them has brought us nothing but trouble." The Sadducees. This proposal appealed to the many people, and some of them became enthusiastic about it, that they went to the king and received from him permission to follow Gentile customs. They built in Jerusalem a stadium like those in the Greek cities. They had surgery performed to hide their circumcision. Look at that. Abandoned the Holy Covenant, started associating with Gentiles, and did all sorts of other evil things. So that's history. And it's confirmed with Daniel 11's prophecy. Or it confirms Daniel 11 prophecy comes true. This was established. This was the established, the strong with a small people established strong with a small people, was the Sadducees among the Jewish people. The Sadducees were a small group who worked in opposition to the Mosaic covenant. They were politically motivated to use deceit in order to undermine the former unity of Jewish people. Antiochus, I like to say Antiochus, I'm sorry. Antiochus the Fourth, that's my way, had developed his support the league made with him he shall work deceitfully among these Sadducees and use them as propagators and informants, and shall become strong with a small people. Right? The small people were the Sadducees. They were traitors. I don't know why they were allowed to live once the Maccabees destroyed Antiochus. I think they should have been put to death for their blasphemies. That's just because if they're following the law, the laws of Moses says that they should have been put to death. Um, verse 24. He shall enter peaceably even upon the fattest places of the province, and he shall do that which his fathers have not done, nor his fathers' fathers. He shall scatter among them the prey and the spoil and the riches, yea, and he shall forecast his devices against the strongholds, even for a time. All right. So First Maccabees 3:30 says, he feared that he should not be able to bear the charges any longer, nor to have such gifts to give so liberally as he did before, because he had abounded above the kings that were before him. Okay. So it has been recognized that Antiochus IV established himself in the wealthiest places of the province, which had experienced great peacefulness. All right. And this confirms this. He shall enter peaceably. even among the fattest places of the province, right? Men thought themselves to be safe and secure and had no mistrust of Antiochus IV's schemes upon them. Those that prospered in wealth and riches were either the principal cities in the kingdom of Syria or the foremost places, the province of Phoenicia. It seems that Antiochus IV had visited these provinces in order to propagate himself in earning their respect for him. Now, as all of the Seleucid kings before him could not do, Antiochus IV ruled over provinces using very few men, which distracted them of what he was doing. He didn't have very many around. There's no pressure. Therefore, they weren't paranoid. And he shall do that which his fathers have not, nor his fathers' fathers. And all of his previous fathers, all the Seleucids, guarded their land heavily. They, they, I mean, which caused the people to not trust the Seleucids. He was given wealth and riches. He then spread it among the poor provinces in order to achieve their loyalties to him, while he increased his empire through his political manipulation. All right? That's why so many people relate Antiochus IV Epiphanes to the Antichrist of the last days, because he is deceitful and a propagator and liar and all of that. And so he is the preview of the last days Antichrist. A preview is the best way to look at him. And here's what Daniel said: He shall scatter among them the prey, spoil, and riches, yea, and he shall forecast his devices against the strongholds. Um, he bribed them basically. Here, they were blessed by their loyalty to him, is what happened. Well, Antiochus III did that with Jerusalem. The phrase in verse 11:24, even for a time, conveys the time frame that will elapse with Antiochus IV while Antiochus IV performed his manipulative conquest. Daniel has been using the word time in his prophecies, which describes an increment of prophetic time. In Daniel 7:25, Daniel is given a prophecy including a time allotted for the fulfillment of prophecy, a time, times, and a half a time. In that passage, a time is equal to 1 year, even for a time. So this is 1 year of this propagating, of this bribery, um, that he deceived and ruled by deceit. To be consistent with prophecy, this time frame referred to in Daniel 11:24 has to conclude to be for 1 year. Since there is not an exact disclosure of time recorded in history, which indicates the actual time that Antiochus IV spent in his endeavor, we should then conclude this to be 1 year. Faithfulness to the Lord and what he has said. Verse 25 and 26. And he, Antiochus IV, shall stir up his power and his coverage against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army. And he shall not stand, for they shall forecast devices against him. Yea, they that feed of the portion of his meat shall destroy him, and his army shall overflow, and many shall fall down slain. So this is a conquest into Egypt, with all of the Seleucids had done. So he wanted to go into Egypt again. So in order to go into Egypt, he had to go southwest on through the Holy Land every time. Thus, that fact excludes Antiochus IV Epiphanes from the prophecy in Daniel 8. It's either 8:4, 8:5, or 8:6, one of those, where it says, gives the direction that the little horn is going to go. The little horn from um, the significant horns, the four significant ones. The little horn comes up in the he goat. That's they. Many want to say that that is Antiochus Epiphanes. No, that's Antichrist. Epiphanes never went south and east on his conquests. That would take him into Arabia. He went southwest into Egypt, which that then excludes him from the Daniel 8 little horn prophecy. So remember that. It seems that after Antiochus IV had built up his empire, he gathered a great army and went forth against Egypt, which initiated the Sixth Syrian War, 170 BC. From the historical accounts written within First Maccabees, one can see that Ptolemy IV Philometor, 181 to 184 BC, brought forth a great army. And 1 Maccabees 1, Ptolemy of Egypt turned and fled, but he shall not stand. Right? So the Egyptians fled. So, when Antiochus had firmly established himself as king, he decided to conquer Egypt and rule that country as well as Syria. He invaded Egypt with a long fleet of ships and a powerful army, including chariots, elephants, and cavalry. When the attack came, King Ptolemy of Egypt turned and fled, and many of the soldiers were killed. Antiochus the fourth, actually, was able to capture the fortified cities of Egypt and plunder the whole land. That's First Maccabees 1:16 through 19. Right? History book confirming what was prophesied here. All right? Here. Okay. King in the south, battle always, right? So he took booty in Egypt after he defeated the king of the south. It's all coming true. Came true. Flavius Josephus describes this conquest and confirms what Daniel, had prophesied. Notice Josephus states, circumvented Ptolemy Philometor by treachery. Here's Josephus. Now, Antiochus, upon the agreeable situation of the affairs of his kingdom, resolved to make an expedition against Egypt, both because he had a desire to gain it and because he condemned the son of Ptolemy, and now weak, not yet of an ability, and not yet of abilities to manage affairs of such consequence. So he came with great forces to Pelusium and circumvented Ptolemy Philometor by treachery and seized upon Egypt. He then came to the places about Memphis, and when he had taken them, he made haste to Alexandria in hopes of taking it by siege and of subduing Ptolemy, who reigned there. So, two different history books confirms this. Though those of Ptolemy's own household, his friends, his flatterers, advisors, and even the generals of his army had impacted the loss of the battle. Yea, they that feed of the portion of the meat shall be destroyed. This was due to either the bad counsels which they gave him, or because of their desertion of him. It seems that it could have been influenced by the manipulations by Antiochus the Fourth. Right? That's my explanation. That he probably sent in what do you call it? Um, spies to manipulate. That's my feeling. He's because he was a liar. He's a manipulator. All right, verse 27. And both of these kings' hearts shall be to do mischief, and they shall speak lies at one table, but it shall not prosper. For yet the end shall be at the appointed time. Right. So apparently, Antiochus IV Epiphanes and Ptolemy IV Philometor met after the battle, sat at a table, and made false promises to one another. They sat and lied to each other over over other each other over what each of their intentions would be concerning the future of their kingdoms. Both, having deceitful hearts, had gained nothing from this meeting. The future would yet be more war between them. Daniel conveys that God had an appointed time, which he planned for this all to end. For the yet is the end shall come in the appointed time. So God already had an appointed end to these kings, king of the north, king of the south. Verse 28. Then shall he return into his land with great riches, and his heart shall be against the holy covenant, and he shall do exploits and return to his own land. So he's feeling a little bit good about himself because he won a war, negotiated in battle, lied, got away with lying in his at the bargaining table with the other king, and feeling all full of himself. He had to go through in Israel, and oh, let's just abuse these. To him, Hellenism was the religion, so he considered them heretics, and so he went through Israel. It is a historical fact while Antiochus IV was returning back from Egypt with his booty that he had taken during this campaign, he stopped by Jerusalem. He purposely visited the hated people of God who had refused to conform to his Hellenistic beliefs. He was angry with them. He said, I'll get you. I'm coming back and I'm going to get you. So in the year 143, after the conquest of Egypt, Antiochus marched with a great army against the land of Israel and city of Jerusalem. In his arrogance, he entered the temple and took away the gold altar, the lampstand with all the equipment, the table for the bread offered to the Lord, the cups and the bowls, the gold and the fire pans, the curtain and the crowns. He also stripped all the gold from the front of the temple and carried off the silver and gold and everything else of value, including all the treasures that he could find stored there. Then he took it all to his own country. He had also murdered many people and boasted arrogantly about it. There was a great mourning everywhere in the land of Israel. That's First Maccabees 1:20 through 25, history book. In the first phrase of the statement from First Maccabees 20 through 25, the year 143 is mentioned. This was the 143rd year of the Seleucid dynasty. This mentioned equates to this year mentioned equates to the year 169 BC, before Christ. This was a horde event that would set up a future chain of events of an even more horrible outcome. As one can see, the prophecies of Daniel has been precisely given to Daniel, which was nearly 4 centuries beforehand, and have come to pass as if one were reading a history book. Please note that First and Second Maccabees, as well as the writings of Flavius Josephus, are history books. These are valuable historical confirmations of the events that actually happened. All right? So not canon. The only one that's canon is Daniel, and his prophecies are coming true, confirmed by these non-canonical history books. Daniel 11:29 and 30. At the time appointed he shall return and come towards the south, but it shall not be as the former or as the latter, because the ships of Shittim shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved and return and have indignation against the holy covenant. So shall he do, so shall he be returned, and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. There's a mouthful here. Okay, so let's go over that. In 167 BC, Antiochus IV attempted, shouldn't be possessive, attempted his third conquest to Egypt, which was occasioned by the Alexandrians having set up the brother of Ptolemy Philometor as king. The first two encounters towards Egypt were much different in contrast to one another. The first was accomplished by diplomacy and political manipulation of the surrounding provinces, who gave Antiochus IV great power and wealth. The second endeavor was war fought in 170 BC. In both endeavors, Antiochus IV was successful. Unfortunately for him, the third was not. King Ptolemy of Egypt and his brother Urgetes came to an agreement and sent a delegation to the Senate of Rome. They pleaded for their help against Antiochus IV, who were preparing to lay siege against them in Alexandria. The Romans sent a Macedonian fleet with their ambassadors Caius Popilus, Caius Dosimus, and Caius Hostilius, because the ships of Shittim shall come against him. Shittim is Rome. To Alexandria to meet Antiochus' military. Caius Popilus, head of the embassy, submitted a decree from the Roman Senate demanding that Antiochus IV to cease from his pursuits of Egypt. Being astonished and intimidated, Antiochus IV agreed and returned back towards Syria. So, those of you that want to say that the little horn in Daniel 8 was Antiochus IV Epiphanes, fooey on you, because he couldn't even beat the Romans. He went back with his tail between his legs here. He was no antichrist beating up on other kingdoms continuously. He was chased, he was beaten twice. The Maccabees beat him too. So shame on you for going with that false doctrine of the preterists and all millennialists. All right. Alexandria. Oh, wait, I said that. What did I do? Okay. Let's see. Okay. So this is First Maccabees 1:29 through 35. 2 years later, Antiochus sent a large army from Mysia against the towns of Judea. When the soldiers entered Jerusalem, their commanders spoke to the people, offered them terms of peace, and completely deceiving them. Then he suddenly launched a fierce attack on the city, dealing it a major blow and killing many of the people. He plundered the city, set it on fire, and tore down its buildings and walls. He and his army took women and children as prisoners and seized the cattle. Then Antiochus and his forces built high walls and strong towers in the area north of the temple, turning it into a fort. They brought in a group of traitorous Jews, installed them there, the Sadducees. They also brought in arms and supplies and stored in the fort all of the loot that they had taken in Jerusalem. The fort became a great threat to the city. See what's going on here. So that confirms what's going on here. With the Sadducees reporting, having intelligence with them that forsake the Holy Covenant, to Antiochus fourth, with the Sadducees reporting to Antiochus fourth concerning the people still remaining unloyal to his decree of the worship of the Hellenistic gods, Antiochus the fourth sent Apollonius to Jerusalem in order to punish the Jews for their unloyalty, while they chose to remain loyal to Yahweh, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. As one can read in First Maccabees 1:29 through 35, Jerusalem was victim to an evil, barbaric pillaging, having indignation against his holy covenant. Right? Okay. Ooh, I didn't make this change the. Ooh, well, might as well because it's. I left. This is the abomination of desolation that Antiochus IV committed. So I guess it means to be bigger. Um, because I made this. I went from 14 font to 12 font. Excuse me. I'm sorry. I'm supposed to be drinking fluids for my health. So I'm belching. I'm sorry. Trying to talk at the same time, sometimes belches come out. I have bad indigestion too, so it's hard to drink. All right. So did I? Yeah. Okay. So we're going to read Daniel 11, verse 31, the abomination of desolation. And arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that makes desolate. Right? These are the solicits. Look at this. Daniel 11:31 announced the prophecy of the first abomination desolation, which was committed by Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Here is the verse that preterists, amillennialists, postmillennialists will twist this to imply that Daniel 9:27 and Revelation 13:5 and 6 have already happened. A rebuke to this ridiculous statement is knowing that Jesus Christ spoke of a future abomination desolation after this happened. This happened after Jesus came to power, came to the earth. So how can you say it was already accomplished? Jesus said in Matthew 24:15, 200 years after the first abomination of desolation had been already committed. Preterists, amillennialists, and postmillennialists will attempt to rationalize that the destruction of the temple in AD 70 was a fulfillment of this. They twist Matthew 24:15 and Luke 21:15 through 24 around their agendas. As I go further down through Daniel 11, I will show where they are in absolute error. Okay. So I'm going to read you First Maccabees 1:54 through 58. And on the 15th day of the month of Kislev in the year 145, King Antiochus set up the awful horror on the altar of the temple, and pagan altars were built in the in the towns throughout Judea. Pagan sacrifices were offered in front of the houses in the streets. Any books of the law which were found were torn up and burned, and anyone who was caught with a copy of the sacred books or who obeyed the law was put to death by an order of the king. Month after month, these wicked people used their power against the Israelites caught in the towns. Now, I just want to throw something extra in here. How did the word of God remain safe? Well, the Essenes rushed the sacred texts to the Dead Sea, the caves of the Dead Sea. And there's where we find the confirmation of the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? The Essenes put them there because of this. Just so you know, it's part of history. You might as well know, when did the Essenes do this? It was right there. All right. The 145th year of the Seleucid dynasty was year 167 BC, when the Essenes actually put the Dead Sea Scrolls away, hid the important uh, books into the Dead Sea caves. King Antiochus IV set up the awful horror on the altar of the temple. They shall place the abomination that makes desolate. Obviously, this was a very disturbing, evil display of the Antichrist spirit. It has been said that Antiochus IV Epiphanes was the preview of the future Antichrist and the end times. Once again, Daniel was given a precise prophecy nearly 400 years before it had happened. Okay? It was fulfilled, as can be confirmed in the history book of the Maccabees. Daniel 11:32. And such as do wickedly against the covenant shall be corrupt by flatteries, but the people that do know their God shall be strong and do exploits. The Maccabees. Because the prophecy of verse 11:32 refers to, and such as do wickedly against the covenant shall he corrupt by flatteries. We shall remember that they were the Sadducees who were collaborators with Antiochus IV, and they most likely assisted in this horrible day which fell upon Jerusalem. These were Jews who were as Hellenistic as Antiochus IV, and were probably praised by him. Shall he corrupt? Shall he corrupt them by flatteries? Right? While they performed the wicked deeds against the Jewish people who were loyal to God in his Mosaic covenant. Right? First Maccabees 2, verses 1 and 5. During that time, a priest of the Jehoiarib family named Mattathias, who was the son of John and the grandson of Simeon, moved from Jerusalem and settled in Modin. Mattathias had 5 sons: John, also called Gadi; Simon, also called Thasi; Judas, also called Maccabeus; Eleazar, also called Avaran; and Jonathan, also called Aphus. Right? So, John Maccabeus. The second half of Daniel 11:32 refers to the rebellion that arose by those who were loyal to God and his covenant. These were the beginning of the Hasmonean dynasty, which started with Mattathias Jehoiarib. Shortly after the revolt against Antiochus IV Epiphanes began, Mattathias died, and his son Judas led the rebellion along with his 4 brothers, Judas Maccabeus. Judas was known as Judas Maccabeus, which then began the reign of the Maccabees. Right? The Maccabees. We're reading from the history books of the Maccabees, their encounters. Daniel was given a prophecy of the rising of the Maccabees, who would begin the rise of power of the Hasmonean rulers, who would reign over Judea, and the arrival of the Messiah. But the people that do not know their God shall be strong and do exploits. This was the fulfillment of another prophecy given to Micah concerning the seven shepherds and eight principal men. The seven shepherds of Mattathias and his five sons, John, Simon, Judas, Eleazar, Jonathan, and the son of Simon, John Hyrcanus the first. Right? So those are the seven shepherds. The eight principal men were rulers over Judea until the time of Christ. The eight can be named as Aristobulus the first, Antigonus the first, Alexander Janneus, Alexander Salome, Aristobulus the second, John Hyrcanus the second, Antipater, and Herod the Great. Those were the eight principal men. Wait a minute. Yeah, the eight principal men, leaders, right? They weren't kings. They called themselves kings, but they were the Hasmoneans, and they were not assigned kings by God. So they were not kings. God assigns Israel their kings, not the people. The kings of Judah has stopped until the coming of Messiah. You can find that in the book of Ezekiel. I'm not going to find that now, but the kings of Judah had stopped when the Babylonian captivity happened. All right. So, where was I? Yeah. So I was troubled by um, the book of Micah in Micah 5:5. I was troubled by it because people wanted to relate that to the last days. And I am a eschatology expert, and there is no way to fit this into the last days. There's no place to fit this in the last days. But I did a research paper in seminary called the Life of Herod the Great and the Hasmoneans, or was it the life of the Hasmoneans and the I can't remember. It's actually it's in this book of Daniel that I wrote. My entire research paper, all the research on the Hasmoneans, and so I'm an expert on the Hasmoneans now. So I'm telling you that Micah 5:5 were the Hasmoneans. So with that in mind, we'll move on. Though Antipater and his son Herod the Great were not of Hasmon blood, they were heavily involved in the relationships with the Hasmonean family. Herod the Great even married Miriam, who was granddaughter of Hyrcanus II, Hasmonean. Okay? So, in Micah 5:5, the one spoken of who brings peace and delivers the Jews refers to Messiah. And this man shall be the peace. The only explanation for this reference would have to be the fact that Messiah is the Lord and he is their peace and deliverer, and he manifests his greatness through his people. The Jews were expecting their Messiah to be arriving within the next century or two. They knew that they needed to stand up against the Hellenistic rulers who imposed their pagan beliefs upon them. The Messiah was their peace and motivation. With the rise of the Hasmonean rulers, the Seleucid Empire never brought any further trouble to Israel because the Roman Empire evolved from the Greek Empire, became dominant from this point of time. Isn't that amazing? The Seleucids kind of fell from their power because of the Hasmoneans, the Maccabees and Hasmoneans. An amazing thing. They didn't drop from existence, but they became weaker and dropped from power. Anyway, I'm going to read you Michael 5:5 through 6. And this man shall be the peace, Messiah. I should capitalize them there. With the Assyrians shall come in our, when the Assyrians shall come into our land, and when he shall tread in our places, then shall we raise against him seven shepherds and eight prophets. Well, who's the Assyrian? Who is the Assyrian? But the Syrian, the Seleucid. The Seleucid is Antiochus' fourth Epiphanes. He's being called the Assyrian here by Micah because Micah didn't know about Syria because the Greeks called the Assyrians Syrians. Micah knew about the people of Assyria, didn't know about the Seleucids. So Micah called King Antiochus IV the Assyrian, because it was the Assyrian king, which was the Seleucid king, right? That's my explanation on that. This man is the peace of the Hasmoneans, the Maccabees. He was their peace. The coming Messiah motivated them. We got to be preparing for Messiah. And so he was their motivator. They had to keep the temple ready for the Messiah. The desecrated temple needed to be cleaned and cleansed and then rededicated. That's what caused the feast of dedication to come about, which was the Hanukkah. So very important piece of history. Very important piece of history. All right. Oh, I was going to explain. Well, I already explained the seven shepherds and eight principal men. And they shall waste the land of Assyria. Okay, the Seleucids. So the the Maccabees, the Hasmonean dynasty, wasted the land of Assyria with the sword, and the land of Nimrod and the entrance thereof. Thus shall he deliver us from the Assyrian, Antiochus the fourth Epiphanes, when he comes into our land and when he treads within our borders. That's Micah 5, 5, and 6. Came to pass during the Maccabees. This is a fulfilled prophecy already. The Maccabees fulfilled, the Hasmoneans fulfilled this prophecy. It is a done deal. Very important prophecy. I left that in big print too. I need to go in and fix that. Many want to include the Micah 5, 5, and 6 prophecy as an end time event when they try to imply that the Assyrian is the Antichrist. There's no place in the scriptures that you can find an Assyrian being called the Antichrist. It is misinterpretations of God's doctrines, of God's word, that people try to include this into their own agenda. Antiochus IV should be called the Assyrian due to the fact that the territory of Syria was a part of Assyria during the days of Micah. The Seleucid dynasty was not yet in existence in order for Micah, oops, I forgot Micah's full name, Micah there to refer. Wow, I need to fix that. Look at these. I'm finding typos to Antiochus IV as Assyrian. It was the Greeks who introduced the name Syria to that region. In the Old Testament, we can find the name Syria in early as Genesis 25:20. If we refer to the Hebrew noun Arami, we find that it was the name given and then translated as Syria by the translators. This should be translated as Aramea, who were the descendants of Aram. Originally, with an Indo-European corruption of Assyria in northern Mesopotamia, the Greeks used the term Syria to not only describe Assyria itself, but the lands to the west, which had for centuries been under Assyrian dominion. So there's the history of the word Syria. It used to be Assyria, and then any king coming in the future, when they're saying there's a king coming from Assyria, from that land, they're called the Assyrian, when actually it's one of the kings of Syria, the Seleucids. All right, just giving you a little update there. All right, so I'm going to read you First Maccabees 2:27. In their grief, Mattathias and his sons tore their clothes, put on sackcloth, and continued in deep mourning. Then Mattathias went through the town shouting, "Everyone who is faithful to God's covenant and obey his laws, follow me." That's Mattathias. With this, he and his sons fled the mountains, leaving behind all they owned. Mattathias and his sons had followers who fled to the mountains, while others had awakened to realize that their loyalty to Yahweh was worth dying for. All right. Daniel 11:33. And they that understand among the people shall instruct many, yet they shall fall by the sword and by flame, by captivity, and by spoil many days. All right. Mattathias and his sons made great efforts to advise those in Jerusalem, and they that understand among the people shall instruct many to resist the demands of Antiochus IV and his leaders. They were insisting for Judeans to forget their loyalty to Yahweh and worship the that was silly. the resist the demands of Antiochus IV and his leaders. So the pronoun they that I wrote here is referring back here. They were insisting that the Judeans to forget their loyalty to Yahweh and to worship the Hellenistic gods, right? I should fix this. It's a little unclear. I've confused myself because I haven't read it in a while, so I need to fix that if I'm confusing myself. Um, here's Matthew. Oh, I'm sorry. Here's First Maccabees 2:35 and 38. The soldiers attacked them immediately, but the Jews did nothing to resist. They did not even throw stones or block the entrances to the caves where they were hiding. They were insisting for Judeans to forget their loyalty to Yahweh and to worship the Hellenistic gods. Now, I'm going to read you here. What is that? First Maccabees 2:35 and 38. Um, the soldiers attacked them immediately, but the Jews did nothing to resist. They did not even throw stones or block the entrances to the caves where they were hiding. They said, "We we will all die with a clear conscience. Let heaven and earth bear witness that you are slaughtering us unjustly." So the enemy attacked them on the Sabbath and killed the men, their wives, their children, and their livestock. 1,000 people died, right? Now, hearing the revolt of Antiochus IV, sent his men to punish the rebels and slaughter many who did not even defend themselves. Yet they shall fall by the sword and by flame, by captivity and spoil in many days. So precise prophecy had been happening here. Again, this was to go on for many days until Mattathias and his rebels came forth into Jerusalem, destroyed the pagan altars, and killed the traitorous Jews. Right? So, Daniel 11, verse 34. This is the last thing having to do with Antiochus, I think. Now, when they shall fall, they shall be holpen with a little help, but many shall cleave to them with flatteries. Now, then I'm going to read you First Maccabees 2:42 through 48. Then Mattathias and his friends were joined by a group of devout and patriotic Jews, the strongest and bravest men in Israel, who had all volunteered to defend the law. In addition, everyone who was fleeing from the persecution joined them and arranged their forces now that they had an army. They gave vent to their anger by attacking the renegade Jews. Those who escaped were forced to flee the Gentiles for safety. Mattathias and his friends went everywhere, tearing down pagan altars and circumcising by force every uncircumcised boy they found within the borders of Israel. They were also successful in hunting down the arrogant Gentile officials. They rescued the law of Moses from the Gentiles and their kings, and broke the power of the wicked king Antiochus. So there's the fall of Antiochus in history. First Maccabees 2:42 through 48. Now, Daniel 11:34 implies that the Jews would receive help from the Maccabees and that there would be many who would be two-faced about their loyalty to Yahweh and his covenant, as they would agree with the rebellion that would turn their backs on the faithful when they faced actual persecution, but many shall cleave to them with flatteries, right? The Maccabees had defended Judea against Antiochus IV Epiphanes and succeeded. Antiochus IV died a sudden death. Many say that it was a supernatural judgment by God who put him through a painful, slow death. And I'm going to read that to you. Oh boy. Second Maccabees 9:4 through 10. It's a important enough place in history that you might as well hear about it. So we're going to begin here. He began furious and decided to make the Jews pay for the defeat he had suffered. So he ordered his chariot driver not to stop until they reached Jerusalem. With great arrogance, he said, "I will turn Jerusalem into a graveyard full of Jews." But he did not know that he was heading straight for God's judgment. In fact, as soon as he had said these words, the all seeing Lord, the God of Israel, struck him down with an invisible but fatal blow. He was seized with sharp intestinal pains by which there was no relief, a fitting punishment for the man who had tortured others in so many terrible ways. But this in no way caused him to give up his pride. Instead, he became more arrogant than ever, and breathing out fiery threats against the Jews, he gave orders to drive even faster. As a result, he fell out of the chariot with such a thud that it made every bone in his body ache. His I don't know if you see this. I'm getting sun coming in here. His arrogant pride made him think he had superhuman strength to make ocean waves obey him and to weigh his high mountains on a pillar scale. But suddenly he fell flat on his ground and had to be carried off on a stretcher, a clear sign to everyone of God's power. Even the eyes of this godless man were crawling with worms, and he lived in a terrible pain of agony. The stink was so bad that his entire army was sickened. No one was able to come close enough to carry him around. Yet only a short while before he thought he could take hold of the stars. So this terrible man, the history of this terrible man, given to you by the Maccabees, in 2 Maccabees 9:4-10, his death. And so a well-deserved, painful death. Um, Here we got Daniel 11:35 as a transitional verse after 1134 finished with the prophecies of the Seleucid dynasty. Verse 1135 brings readers first fast forward to the last days before the return of Jesus Christ. All right, so I'm going to read verse 35, the transitional verse, taking you from the end of the Maccabees, the end of the Antiochus, the Fourth Epiphanes, to the last days. It's a transitional verse here. Now let's break it down. And some of them of understanding shall fall to try them and to purge and to make them white, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. No, we're not talking about the Maccabees here. Preterists, millennialists, postmillennialists want to continue verse 1135 while including it within time of Antiochus IV. They insist on including this in order to connect Antiochus IV to the Antichrist mentioned in verse 11:36-39. The twisting of the scripture in order to satisfy a heretical doctrine occurs when a cherry-picked verses are used to explain their beliefs. Verse 1135 is a blanket statement covering the persecution which the children of God have endured. This will conclude at the time of the end, even to the time of the end, right? See, it says even to the time of the end here, right? So, some want to say that this points out the time of the end of the Seleucid dynasty. It seems that they do not understand the phrase that follows because it is yet for a time appointed. That time that is yet appointed points to the last of the persecution of God's children. I do not see this as a time of the rapture of the church, but the time of the second coming of Jesus Christ. This will occur. This will occur after the 70th week of Daniel of Daniel 9:27 is concluded. After Jesus disposes of the Antichrist, the false prophet, and the rest of the heathen, an angel will put Satan in chains for 1,000 years, and persecution will cease. Right? Only the saints will be washed white. And I'll read you Isaiah 1:18. Come now and let us reason together, says the Lord. Though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be white as snow. Though they be red like crimson, they shall be as wool. This is a prophecy from Isaiah of the new covenant. We as saints are washed by the blood of the Lamb. One needs to complete the persecution of the saints. One needs to conclude that the persecution of the saints, washed white by the blood of the Lamb, will happen until the return of Jesus Christ. It is an appointed time which has yet to be revealed. With that said, verse 1135 forwards us to the time right before the last days will occur, which begins in verse 1136 through 1136 through 39 is the last days Antichrist, the one that begins the 7 years of peace covenant. So there you have it. So I'm gonna discontinue this video here. It's going to be a three-part series, so this is an hour long now. So click like down below. Down below in the comments is going to be the link to the part 3 of this video and this video teaching series on Daniel 11. Until you get to see the next time, may God bless.